The greatest vulnerability in Virion Technologies' billion-dollar empire wasn't hidden deep within its encrypted servers or guarded by layers of digital firewalls. It sat in plain sight every single day. An 8-year-old girl with a tattered notebook, who understood the building's fatal secret before anyone inside even suspected there was a lock on the door, let alone a key. Her name was Leah, and her kingdom was a small, worn patch of carpet in the lobby of the Glass Titan that owned the sky. From this humble throne, she watched the gods of this modern Olympus stride past. They were the high priests of data, executives in $1,000 shoes who moved with the unshakable confidence of those who believe they have tamed the future. To them, she was a phantom, a motionless blur in their peripheral vision, easily dismissed as the daughter of the woman who cleaned their offices, an invisible, silent part of the building's machinery. While her mother, Maria, pushed a cart laden with cleaning supplies, her presence a quiet apology for existing in their world, Leah sat as a silent witness to their grand performance of power, her focus absolute and unseen. But Leah saw them. More importantly, she saw the system they had built and worshipped. Her tattered notebook wasn't filled with childish doodles of ponies and houses, but with intricate, sprawling diagrams of circuits that didn't exist yet. She was a cartographer of the impossible, mapping out motherboards for devices that needed no wires and sketching the delicate architecture of signals broken and remade. She saw the world not as people and objects, but as a series of interconnected systems, some elegant, some deeply flawed. And in the gleaming fortress of Virion, a place of supposed perfection, she could see the hairline fracture in its foundation. She knew this titan had a glass jaw. The building hummed with the quiet symphony of its own perceived invincibility, a self-contained universe of sterile code. But Leah, in her silent observation, felt a different rhythm beneath that hum, a faint, dissonant tremor, a whisper of chaos just waiting for its cue. It was the subtle shift in the air that comes before a storm, the deep breath a predator takes before it strikes, signaling that the order of things was about to be irrevocably broken. The hum was about to be shattered by a silence far more terrifying than any alarm, a digital silence that would bring the Titan to its knees. For a company that monetized certainty, the one thing they couldn't control was the sudden, cascading wave of pure, unadulterated panic. It began not with a bang, but with a flicker. The overhead lights, usually a sterile, unwavering white, dimmed for a microsecond before surging back, causing a few people to look up from their screens in annoyance. Then, it happened again. On the 47th floor, in the Network Operations Command Center, the digital heart of Virion, a junior technician frowned at his monitor. A single red packet, an anomaly so small it was almost statistical noise, flashed across his screen and vanished. He blinked, thinking it was a glitch. Then, the world ended. Every screen in the multi-billion-dollar facility went black. Not the gentle, power-saving black of an idle computer, but a deep, terminal blackness, an abyss where data used to be. The gentle hum of the servers was replaced by the high-pitched, piercing scream of uninterruptible power supply alarms, a sound no one had heard outside of a drill. For a full 3 seconds, there was absolute silence, a collective intake of breath from 200 of the brightest minds in technology. Then chaos erupted. What was that? What the hell was that? A senior engineer yelled, his voice cracking. Breach. We have a breach. Mainframe is unresponsive. Another voice cut through the noise. Red emergency lights began to strobe, bathing the room in a hellish, pulsing glow. Phones, suddenly useless for data, began to ring with frantic voice calls, their chimes adding to the cacophony. People were shouting, running, pointing at dead screens, as if accusing them of betrayal. The carefully constructed illusion of control had been ripped away, revealing the raw, primal fear underneath. This wasn't just a system failure. It was a digital plague, spreading through the building's veins, and they were utterly, terrifyingly helpless. Down in the lobby, the lights flickered and died, replaced by the same ominous red glow from the emergency fixtures. People gasped. A woman dropped her phone, the clatter echoing in the sudden quiet. But Leah didn't flinch. She looked up from her notebook, her expression not one of fear, but of intense concentration. She watched the wave of panic spread through the adults around her gaze analytical. They were reacting to the symptoms, not the cause. The scene in the command center was a masterpiece of desperation. Marcus Vale, the CEO, stormed into the room, his face a thundercloud. "Report," he barked, his voice a whip crack that cut through the noise for a second. "Now." "We don't know, sir," stammered his chief technology officer, a man with 3 PhDs and a 7-figure salary, now pale and sweating. "It's everything. The core network is gone. The backups are isolated, but we can't access them. It's like the entire system just vanished." "Vanished? Data doesn't vanish," Marcus roared, slamming his hand on a console. The financial ticker on a single, battery-powered auxiliary screen was a river of blood, showing their stock price plummeting in after-hours trading. Millions of dollars were turning to smoke with every second that passed. "Find the intrusion point. I want to know who did this, and I want them crucified." The engineers, the so-called experts, were a blur of frantic, useless motion. They typed furiously on dead terminals, shouted acronyms at each other. "Did you check the DNS resolver? Is it a DDoS attack? Maybe a zero-day exploit?" Their words were just incantations against the darkness that wouldn't listen. They were firefighters throwing buckets of water at a volcano. Amidst this storm, Elias, a young intern on his first week, felt a growing sense of dread. He wasn't a genius like the men shouting around him, but he could recognize a flock of birds flying in the wrong direction. None of their solutions were working. It felt like they were trying to pick a lock on a door that had been welded shut from the other side. Overwhelmed, he backed away from the command console and leaned against the glass wall overlooking the lobby. His eyes scanned the chaos below, and then he saw her. The janitor's kid. She was sitting in her usual spot, bathed in the eerie red light, perfectly still. But she wasn't crying or hiding. Her head was tilted, her gaze fixed on the patterns of the strobing emergency lights. She was thinking. On a whim, driven by a desperate need for a different perspective, Elias took the elevator down. He approached her cautiously. "Hey, are you okay?" Leah looked up, her eyes clear and focused. "They're asking the wrong questions," she said, her voice a quiet murmur. Elias blinked. "What do you mean?" "They're shouting about monsters and ghosts," she said, her gaze drifting back towards the frantic energy of the floors above. "They think something broke in to smash the castle. But the lights flickered first. You don't knock on the door and then break it down. You do it quietly." She paused, looking at her own drawing of a complex logic gate. "I don't think anything broke in," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I think the doors were locked from the inside." Elias stared at her, a chill running down his spine. The simplicity and terrifying logic of her statement cut through all the technical jargon he'd been hearing upstairs. The experts were searching for an external enemy, an attacker who had breached their walls. But Leah was suggesting something far more insidious, that the system hadn't been attacked, it had been commanded. It had committed suicide. He looked from the calm, determined face of the 8-year-old girl to the panicked, failing geniuses in the command center. For the first time that day, he felt a sliver of something that wasn't terror. It was a strange, impossible flicker of hope. Her whisper was nearly lost in the shouting, a single drop of logic in an ocean of fear, but it was a drop that would soon cause a tidal wave. In a room filled with $100 million of salary and ego, the company's entire future would be gambled on the hunch of an 8-year-old girl that nobody even knew existed. Elias sprinted back to the 47th floor, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and a wild, illogical conviction. He pushed his way through the throng of uselessly scurrying engineers to find David Chun, a senior systems architect. "David, I think I have something. If it's not the root password to God's personal server, I don't want to hear it, kid," Chun snapped, not even looking up from a dead screen. "It's not about breaking in," Elias insisted, his voice louder than he intended. The system wasn't breached. It was a logic bomb. It was locked down from within. We need to be looking for an internal command loop, not an external attacker. Chen finally looked at him, his expression a perfect blend of pity and contempt. A logic bomb? Kid, we have the most sophisticated threat detection suite on the planet. We would have seen it coming a mile away. Now, get out of my way. He turned his back, dismissing me in turn as a gnat in a hurricane. The anger was so sharp it tasted like metal in Elias's mouth. He saw Marcus Vale pacing like a caged lion, his face ashen as he listened to a lawyer on his phone talk about regulatory fines and breach disclosures. This was it, the point of no return. Fueled by a surge of adrenaline, Elias did the stupidest and bravest thing of his life. He walked straight up to the CEO. "Mr. Vale," he shouted, his voice cracking but clear. Marcus stopped, turning with a look that could curdle milk. "What?" "They're wrong," Elias said, pointing at the flailing engineers. "Everyone is looking outside. The attack came from the inside. It's a recursive lockout. We need to check the socket overflow loop." The room went quiet. The engineers turned to stare. The term was obscure, almost archaic. Marcus Vale stared at Elias, his eyes narrowing. "And where did you get this brilliant theory, intern?" The sarcasm was thick enough to cut with a knife. Elias swallowed hard. This was the moment. "From the janitor's daughter," he said, his voice barely a whisper. A beat of stunned silence, and then a ripple of cruel, disbelieving laughter spread through the room. Chen rolled his eyes so hard it looked painful. "Oh, for God's sake," he muttered. Marcus's face hardened. He looked as if he was about to have Elias thrown out of the building. But then he glanced at the financial ticker. They were down 20%. Another 15 minutes, and they'd have a halt trading. They were at the bottom of the barrel, and the barrel was on fire. He looked at the faces of his expert team, faces of defeat and confusion. Then he looked at Elias, who stood his ground, terrified but resolute. Desperation made for strange allies. "Fine," Marcus said, the word cutting through the tension. "Fine. Let her look. What in God's name have we got to lose now?" He pointed a trembling finger at Elias. "You. Get her. Now." A security guard, his face a mask of confusion, escorted Elias down to the lobby. Maria, Leah's mother, rushed forward, thinking her daughter was in trouble. "Sir, what is happening? Is she okay?" "She's more than okay," Elias said, kneeling in front of Leah. "Leah, can you show us what you were talking about?" Leah simply nodded, her expression serious. She clutched her notebook and walked towards the elevator, the security guard and Elias flanking her like a royal escort. When she entered the command center, a hush fell over the room. It was a surreal tableau. The strobing red lights, the billion-dollar technology, the defeated engineers, and this tiny girl in a hand-me-down sweater. "Put her at Chen's terminal," Marcus commanded, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. The large, intimidating security guard gently lifted Leah onto the massive ergonomic chair. Her feet dangled a foot off the floor. The screen in front of her was black, displaying only a single, blinking cursor from a low-level access port, the digital equivalent of a building's emergency maintenance hatch. The room held its breath. The skeptical stares were like physical weights. Chun stood behind her, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips, waiting for the child to fail. Then, her fingers touched the keyboard, and the world melted away. For Leah, there was no pressure, no audience, no strobing lights. There was only the puzzle, the system. Her small hands, which had only ever known crayons and broken radio parts, moved with an unnatural speed and precision. She wasn't just typing. She was having a conversation. She navigated through firewalls that were supposed to be impenetrable, not by breaking them, but by finding the side doors the architects had forgotten they'd built. She saw the attacker's code, and it was elegant, personal. It wasn't the brute force signature of a hostile state or a hacking collective. It was the work of an artist, someone who knew the system's soul. She realized the final lockout wasn't protected by a standard password. It was a key, an emotional one, a trap for the system's own creator. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for a clue, a piece of the architect's heart left lying around. Her gaze fell on Marcus Vale's abandoned command console. Tucked into the corner of the monitor frame was a small, faded photograph. A man, a younger Marcus, smiling with a little girl on his shoulders. The girl was wearing a locket shaped like the letter a flash of insight. It was a guess, a leap of faith into the mind of a man she'd never met. Her fingers flew across the keyboard one last time, typing a single five-letter word. A-M-E-L-I-A. She hit enter. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. The cursor just blinked. Chun let out a condescending scoff. And then, the screen flickered. The single cursor was gone, replaced by a cascade of green text scrolling up the screen. At the very top, a single, beautiful line glowed in the darkness. Admin shell access granted. The collective gasp in the room was like the sound of the tide turning. Chen's jaw went slack. Elias felt tears welling in his eyes. Leah hadn't just picked the lock. She had whispered the secret name of the kingdom, and the gates had swung open just for her. The single line of green text didn't just unlock a system. It shattered the foundation of every assumption in that room. And for the CEO, it was about to unlock a memory he had buried for decades. The system was saved, but the CEO was now broken. Because in the reflection of the little girl on the screen, he saw the ghost of a boy he thought he'd left behind. The moment the admin shell appeared, the room exploded. But it wasn't the sound of panic anymore. It was the sound of frantic, focused, electrified action. She's in. She's in. Chin yelled, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated, replaced by wide-eyed awe. Get a trace on that lockout script. Isolate and purge. Engineers who had been staring blankly at dead screens just moments before now swarmed the terminal, shouting commands, their fingers flying as they followed the path Leah had cleared. With the master key, they could now fight back. System by system, server by server, the lights on the main status board began to blink from red to amber, and then, one by one, to a steady, life-giving green. The digital heart of Virion Technologies began to beat again. But Marcus Vale didn't see any of it. He stood frozen, his eyes locked on the small girl in the oversized chair. He wasn't looking at the hero who had just saved his company from the brink of annihilation. He was looking at the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the way her small fingers moved with an instinct that couldn't be taught, the quiet confidence that radiated from her as she pointed to a line of code and explained its flawed logic to a humbled David Chun. And it was in that moment that the walls of his carefully constructed world came crashing down. He turned and walked stiffly out of the command center, ignoring the jubilant shouts of his employees. He went to his corner office, the one with the panoramic view of the city he had conquered, and sank into his leather chair. The view offered no comfort. He felt like a stranger in his own life. Security, he said into his desk phone, his voice hoarse. Pull all video archives from the main lobby. Every minute of the last 3 months. Send them to my private terminal. Now. Minutes later, the files arrived. He clicked play, and he watched. He saw hours of footage of Leah sitting in her corner of the lobby. He saw her tracing patterns on the floor tiles, her eyes following the paths of the electrical conduits in the ceiling. He saw her pull a discarded remote control from a trash can and, with a paperclip and a piece of foil from a gum wrapper, make its little red light blink again. And he saw the notebook. He zoomed in on the grainy footage, his heart constricting in his chest. They weren't doodles. They were schematics. Complex, elegant, beautiful schematics that would have challenged his best R&D engineers. She had been here all this time. A mind like that, a universe of potential, sitting 10 feet away from the elevator he rode every single day. And he had never once seen her. The image on the screen of the small girl reverse engineering his world with nothing but a pencil and her own brilliant mind triggered something deep within him, a memory he had locked away in the deepest vault of his soul. The polished glass of his office melted away, replaced by the grimy, peeling paint of his St. Jude's home for boys. He was 10 years old again, small and wiry, with a defiant spark in his eyes. He remembered the feel of cold metal in his hands, the guts of a broken radio he had found in a dumpster. He remembered the matron, Mrs. Gable, snatching it from him, her voice sharp and cruel. Stop wasting your time with that junk, Marcus. Clever boys with no family don't get to be inventors. They get to be trouble. He remembered the sting of those words. He had vowed that day to become so powerful, so successful, that no one would ever call him junk again. He had built Virion as his fortress, a monument of success so high that it would cast a shadow over all his doubts, all his insecurities, all the shame of being the clever boy with no family. He had measured people by their resumes, their pedigrees, their titles, all the things he never had. In his quest to escape his past, he had become Mrs. Gable, the very symbol of the dismissive, blind authority he despised. A single, hot tear traced a path down his cheek. He was looking at Leah on the screen, but he was seeing himself. The same spark, the same hunger to understand, the same quiet genius that the world was determined to ignore. The cyberattack hadn't been the real disaster. The real disaster was that a mind like Leah's could exist in his world, and the only person who saw her was the one who was paid the least. The janitor's son, Elias, had seen her. Her mother, Maria, had seen her. But he, Marcus Vale, the visionary, the titan of industry, had been utterly, profoundly blind. He hadn't just been saved from financial ruin. He had been saved from himself. The realization was a painful, cleansing fire. The code was being fixed, the systems restored. But the culture of his company, the very soul of the empire he had built, was fundamentally broken. And he was the only one who could fix it. With the ghosts of the past and the reality of the present colliding, Marcus Vale knew that simply saying thank you would be the greatest insult of all. This moment didn't call for a reward, it called for a revolution. Some heroes get medals, some get parades, but the most meaningful reward Leah would receive was a simple question that would redefine the future of a billion-dollar company. The next morning, the sun rose on a Virion that was bruised but alive. The stock had stabilized, the data was secure, and a carefully worded press release about a brief systems anomaly had calmed the markets. The old Marcus would have held a press conference, projecting strength and control. The new Marcus did something far more important. He sent a respectful, handwritten invitation to Maria and Leah, asking them to meet him in the main boardroom on the 50th floor, a room often called the throne room, where fates were decided and billion-dollar deals were made. When Maria and Leah entered, they found not a room full of intimidating executives, but only Marcus and a humbled Elias. The long, polished table that usually separated people was ignored. They sat in comfortable chairs in the corner of the room. Maria was nervous, clutching her purse, unsure why she was there. Leah, however, looked at the room with the same curious, analytical gaze she gave everything else. Marcus didn't begin with pleasantries. He looked directly at Maria, his eyes filled with a sincerity she had never seen from anyone in this building. Maria, he began, his voice quiet but firm. For years, you have quietly and professionally taken care of this company. And in all that time, I am ashamed to say I never once truly saw you. Or your daughter. Yesterday, your daughter did more than save this company's data. She saved its soul. She saved me from my own blindness. He then turned to Leah. Leah, he said, leaning forward, what you did was brilliant. Not just the solution, but how you saw the problem. It was a level of insight I haven't seen in my entire career. He stood up and walked to the room's main display. Effective immediately, our primary internal firewall, the Aegis defense system, is being renamed. It will now be known as the LEH protocol. It stands for Logical Execution Analysis Heuristic, a tribute to the person who reminded us that the strongest defense is a new way of seeing. He continued, his voice gaining strength. Furthermore, I am announcing the creation of the Amelia Fund. He glanced at the photo of his daughter on his phone, a multi-million-dollar scholarship dedicated to finding and nurturing gifted young minds, especially those from backgrounds that are often overlooked. And finally, all age and formal education requirements for our internship programs are hereby abolished. Talent will be our only metric. A tear rolled down Maria's cheek. She was speechless. Marcus knelt, so he was at eye level with Leah. This scholarship is for you if you want it. A full ride to any school, any program, all the way through your PhD. We will give you all the resources you need. But I have another offer. A job. Leah tilted her head. A job. Yes, Marcus said. I want you to be Virion's first chaos consultant. I want you to look at our systems, our ideas, our new products, and I want you to find the flaws. I want you to help us see what we're blind to. You won't report to an engineer. You'll report directly to me. A long silence filled the room. Leah looked at her mother, then at the view of the city, and then back at the CEO. A small, thoughtful frown appeared on her face. She considered the offer with the seriousness of a master chess player contemplating her next move. Finally, she looked Marcus in the eye and asked the one question that proved she understood everything. Will I still be allowed to break things? For the first time since the crisis began, a genuine, unburdened smile spread across Marcus Vale's face. It reached his eyes. Yes, Leah, he said, his voice thick with emotion. In fact, I'm counting on it. Months later, Virion was a different company. The hallways seemed brighter. The energy was less about arrogance and more about collaboration. Leah, with her own official access badge and a custom-built workspace filled with circuit boards and spare parts, became a common sight. Engineers would stop by not to humor her, but to genuinely ask for her perspective. And hanging on the wall in Marcus Vale's office, right next to his degrees and awards, was a simple, framed piece of paper. The first schematic Leah had ever drawn in her tattered notebook. It was his daily reminder that the greatest innovations don't come from a place of power, but from a place of perspective. Leah's story is a powerful reminder that genius doesn't wear a uniform or carry a resume. It's a silent force waiting in the lobbies and classrooms of the world. The biggest threat to our future isn't a cyber attack. It's our own blindness to the potential right in front of us. If her story moved you, click here to watch our next video, where we uncover the story of a high school dropout who solved a mathematical problem that had stumped professors for a century. The pattern of hidden genius is everywhere. You just have to know how to look.